It sends you an invitation written in sweet words with your name spelled correctly and a warm greeting at the top, but the real message underneath is something much uglier. It says, "Come back so we can see that we were right about you." It says, "Come back, little girl who sold bread and torn shoes, and let us confirm what we always believed, that you are never going to be anything." Amara Okonkwo received that kind of invitation on a Thursday afternoon. She read it once, she read it twice. Then she set her phone down on the kitchen table in her apartment in Seoul, South Korea, looked out the window at a city that had once been completely foreign to her, and felt something rise up in her chest that was not quite anger and not quite sadness. It was something older and quieter than both of those things. It was the feeling of a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side, being asked to return to the people who lit the match. She picked up her phone again. She showed it to the man sitting across the table from her. He read it. He looked up at her. He said 4 words. "When do we leave?" This is the story of how Amara Okonkwo went home. Before Seoul, before the scholarship, before the hospital corridors and the stethoscope and the life that nobody in her family believed was coming, there was Lagos. And in Lagos, there was a little girl awake before the sun with a tray of bread balanced on her head and dusty roads stretching out in front of her like a long and difficult sentence with no end in sight. Amara Okonkwo was the daughter of a woman who worked 3 jobs and still came home with barely enough. Her father had made promises he never intended to keep and disappeared before Amara was old enough to understand what disappearing meant. What she was left with was a mother who loved fiercely, a one-room home that leaked when it rained, a white uniform washed so many times the white had surrendered entirely and become a pale, sorry yellow, and a mind so sharp and so hungry that no amount of hardship could dull it. Every morning, Amara woke at 5. She loaded the bread tray, she walked the routes she had memorized before she was 10 years old, calling out to early risers, counting her small earnings with careful fingers, and then rushing back home to wash her face, change her clothes, and walk to school, where she sat in the front row and wrote down everything that teacher said, like the words were made of gold. Because to Amara, they were. Every lesson was a door. Every door was a way out. She was not going to stop opening doors until she found the one that led somewhere worth going. Her cousins found her exhausting. They were the children of Auntie Chioma, her father's sister, who had married a man with money and never let anyone forget it. They went to better schools, they wore newer shoes, they spoke in the kind of loud, easy way that people speak when they have never had to count anything. And they looked at Amara the way people look at something they consider beneath them, with a kind of lazy, comfortable amusement that does not even bother to hide itself. They called her the bread girl. They said it like it was funny. Amara learned early that the best response to that kind of mockery was not tears and not anger. It was silence, and underneath the silence, a slow and steady, burning determination that would one day grow into something those cousins could never have predicted and would never fully recover from seeing. Auntie Chioma was the orchestra conductor of all of this. She was a tall woman with a loud presence and a talent for saying devastating things in a cheerful voice. The kind of woman who could ruin your confidence while offering you a plate of food. At every family gathering, she found a way to make Amara's poverty the entertainment. She spoke about Amara's mother in pitying tones that were worse than insults, she patting Amara on the head like a problem too small to solve. And she planted one sentence into the soil of every family event, like the seed of poison. That girl will end up nowhere. She said it so often and so casually that even people who did not dislike Amara began to believe it simply because they had heard it so many times. Amara heard it too, every single time. She was not deaf and she was not foolish. She just understood something those people did not, that the opinions of people who had never tried to help her had absolutely no authority over the direction of her life. She stored every dismissal, every laugh, every pitying look, not as wounds, but as fuel. And she kept going. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, in an envelope so plain and unremarkable that Amara's mother almost used it to fan the charcoal stove before she noticed the official stamp in the corner. She called Amara over with a voice that was trying very hard to stay calm and failing. Amara opened it standing in the doorway of their home with the morning light coming in behind her, and she read it once, and her hands started shaking. Then she read it again. Then she sat down on the floor because her legs simply stopped working the way legs are supposed to work. It was a full academic scholarship, every cost covered, every fee paid, to study nursing at a university in South Korea. She had applied 8 months earlier, after her school teacher, the only adult outside her home who had ever looked at her with genuine belief, had found the program and printed the application form and placed it on Amara's desk without a word. Amara filled it out at night with candlelight, written the essay 3 times before she was satisfied, and sent it off with the kind of desperate but dignified hope that poor people who dare to dream learn to carry quietly. She had told no one she applied, not her mother, not her friends, and absolutely not Auntie Chioma, because hope, when it is fragile, needs to be kept away from people who enjoy breaking things. Now the answer was in her hands, and the answer was yes. Her mother wept in the way that only mothers who have sacrificed everything and asked for nothing know how to weep. Without drama, without noise, just tears that came from somewhere very deep and very real. Amara held her, and they stayed like that for a long time on the floor of their one-room home. 2 women holding each other in a small space that had always been too small for the size of what they carried inside them. Amara did not inform Auntie Chioma. She did not call the cousins. She packed one bag, a single, modest bag that contained everything she needed and nothing she did not. She hugged her mother for a very long time at the airport. She walked through the departure date, and she got on a plane for the first time in her 20 years of living and flew across the world to a country where she did not speak the language, did not know the food, did not know a single face, and had nothing to rely on except the one thing that had always been enough: herself. Korea was nothing like anything Amara had ever experienced. The cold arrived before the plane even landed properly and settled into her bones like it intended to stay. The streets were clean in a way that felt almost unreal to someone raised in Lagos. The food was built on flavors her tongue had no memory of. The language moved through the air around her like water she could hear but not hold. And everywhere she went, people looked at her. Not always with hostility, but with a curiosity so open and so unashamed that it sometimes felt like being an exhibit rather than a person. Her hair drew the most attention. She wore it natural, in its full and beautiful complexity, and she watched people on the train reach toward it before catching themselves. She watched children point. She watched adults pretend they were not staring, while very clearly staring. She was, in ways she had not fully prepared for, completely visible and completely alone at the same time, which is one of the loneliest combinations a human being can experience. But Amara Okonkwo had sold bread before sunrise for years. She had studied by the light of a candle when the electricity ran out. She had sat in a classroom wearing shoes that let in the rain and still answered every question correctly. She did not know how to be defeated by discomfort. Discomfort was simply the address where her growth had always lived. She threw herself into her studies with the same focused energy she had always had. Only now, she had resources she had never dreamed of: a proper library, functioning laboratories, professors who returned her work with detailed feedback, and a desk in a warm room where she could study without counting how much candle she had left. She learned Korean with the same determination she brought to every subject, practicing phrases in her small dormitory room at night, making mistakes fearlessly, and improving steadily. She called her mother every Sunday. She cried on the phone sometimes. Her mother cried too. But Monday always came, and Amara always showed up. She was not the top student in her first semester. She was not supposed to be. She was a young woman learning an entirely new world while also trying to become a nurse in it. But she was consistent, and she was present, and she was real in a way that her professors noticed and her classmates gradually came to respect. The girl from Lagos was not going anywhere. She was, in fact, just getting started. It was a Tuesday evening in Amara's second year when the event happened that she would later describe to her mother as both the most embarrassing and the most important moment of her time in Korea. She was in the university library, alone at a table near the science section, deep in a chapter on human anatomy that seemed specifically designed to be as confusing as possible. She had read the same paragraph 5 times. She understood it less each time. The frustration was building in her chest, the way pressure builds in something sealed too tight. And then she shifted in her chair, and her elbow caught the edge of the shelf beside her, and a cascade of heavy textbooks came down around her with a crash so loud the entire floor of the library turned to look. Every head lifted. Every pair of eyes found her. The silence after the crash was enormous. Every person went back to their work. Every person except one. From the far corner of the room, a tall young Korean man in a gray sweater stood up, walked over without any hurry, and began picking up the books one by one with the calm efficiency of someone who had decided this was simply the next thing to do. He stacked them neatly. He did not make a face. He did not make her feel small. When the last book was back on the shelf, he looked at her and said in careful, deliberate English, the English of someone who had studied it seriously but did not yet trust it fully, "The anatomy chapter is the worst one in the whole course. I made notes last year. You can use them if you want." His name was Ji-ho Kang. He was a third-year medical student, the son of a family that ran one of Seoul's respected private hospitals, a quiet and deeply thoughtful person who read more than he spoke and meant everything he said. He was also, though neither of them knew it yet, going to become the most important person in Amara Okonkwo's life. They started as study partners. They met in that same library 3 times a week, working through their separate but often overlapping subjects, exchanging notes and explanations across the table in a mixture of English and broken attempts at each other's languages that somehow over weeks and then months became a language of their own. He taught her Korean medical terminology. She taught him Yoruba proverbs her mother had raised her on and explained the philosophy inside each one. He introduced her to Korean food she had been too cautious to try alone: fermented, spicy, layered with flavor in ways that reminded her unexpectedly of home. She taught him to make jollof rice on the tiny illegal cooker she kept under her dorm room bed, and he stood in her doorway watching the process with the serious attention of a man taking notes on something he intended to understand completely. What grew between them was not the dramatic, sudden thing that stories sometimes describe. It was slower and realer than that. It was built from hundreds of small moments of genuine attention, the kind of attention that says, "I see you." Not the idea of you, but the actual you. And it became, without either of them planning it, the most honest relationship either of them had ever had. Ji-ho Kang had a life that looked, from the outside, like everything a person could want. A respected family name, a clear professional future, financial security that he had never once had to worry about. And yet, inside that comfortable structure was a young man who felt the weight of other people's expectations pressing down on him every single day like a ceiling he could not stand up fully beneath. His family had decided long before he had any opinion on the matter who he was going to marry. She was from another established Korean family, selected with the careful logic of people who treat personal relationships the way they treat business agreements, looking for compatibility of status, not of souls. Jiho was not cruel enough to hate this woman, who had done nothing wrong, but he was honest enough with himself to know that what his family had arranged had nothing to do with love and everything to do with appearances. And he had grown up watching what happened to people who spent their lives maintaining appearances. They became hollowed out, performing versions of themselves, smiling at gatherings while something real and necessary slowly starved inside them. He did not want that life. He had just not known how to say so until Amara. Because Amara did not perform. She did not dress herself up in a version of herself designed to be acceptable. She was exactly who she was at all times. Direct, warm, funny in the dry and unexpected way of someone who has survived real difficulty, and possessed of a self-knowledge that Jiho found both extraordinary and humbling. She knew what she valued. She knew what she refused to accept. She knew who she was and where she came from, and she carried both things without apology. He told her about the arranged plans. She listened without judgment. She told him about the family who called her the bread girl. He listened the same way. They handed each other the parts of themselves they had never shown anyone else, and neither of them dropped what they were given. By the time they graduated, Amara finishing among the highest-ranked nursing students in her cohort, Jiho among the top medical graduates of his year, they were in a relationship that both families had feelings about, and neither of them was willing to end it to satisfy those feelings. Jiho's mother said Amara was not Korean. His uncle said she came from nothing. Jiho looked at both of them with the steady calm of a person who has already made up his mind, and said simply that they were looking at her wrong, and that one day they would understand what they had almost caused him to lose. It was not easy. It was never easy. But they kept choosing each other. That was the whole of it. 6 years after Amara Okonkwo first landed in Korea with one bag and a determination that refused to be reasonable about its own limits, she was a senior registered nurse at a respected Seoul hospital, managing a ward, mentoring junior nurses, and known among the patients in her care as the woman who remembered everyone's name and never made anyone feel like a number. Jiho was now Dr. Jiho Kang, a fully qualified family medicine physician working at the hospital his father had once implied Amara would never belong near. Their apartment was warm and small and filled with things from both worlds: Korean pottery and Nigerian fabric, medical journals stacked beside Yoruba proverb books, photographs on the wall that told the story of two lives that had chosen to become one. Then, the message arrived. It came from Auntie Chioma, wrapped in the language of family warmth, dressed up in words about togetherness and reunion and love. But Amara knew how to read between those lines. She had been reading between those lines since she was old enough to carry a bread tray. The invitation was for a large family gathering back in Lagos. Everyone was coming. And near the bottom of the message, in sentences that smiled at you while doing something else entirely, Auntie Chioma had written, "We are inviting everyone, even those who left us and thought they were better. Come and show us how you turned out, dear Amara." Amara understood exactly what that sentence meant. It meant, come back so we can see if we were right. It meant, come back, bread girl, and let us look at you. It meant that the woman who had spent years telling everyone that Amara would end up nowhere now wanted a front row seat to confirm her prediction, and if the prediction was wrong, Auntie Chioma would find a way to rewrite it in real time so it still felt like she had won. Amara could have declined. She could have sent a polite message about being too busy and moved on. No one would have blamed her. But there was her mother in that message, too. Her mother, who was at every one of those family gatherings sitting near the kitchen because no one ever thought to give her a better seat. Her mother, who washed that pale yellow uniform with her own tired hands and never once let Amara see her give up. Going back was not about Auntie Chioma. It was about standing beside her mother in a room of people who underestimated them both. Jiho read the message. He put the phone down. He looked at Amara across the table with the expression of a man who had already done the calculation and reached the conclusion. He said, "When do we leave?" It was not a question. The compound was everything Lego's family gatherings always are. Enormous, loud, fragrant with food that had been cooking since the night before, filled with aunties in bright coordinated fabric and uncles arguing about things that did not need arguing about, and children who treated the entire space like a personal playground with no rules. Word had spread, because it always spreads, that Amara was coming. And word had also spread, through the cousin who lived in Seoul and was incapable of keeping information to herself, that she was bringing a Korean man who was some kind of doctor, though several relatives had already decided this was probably exaggerated or outright invented. The whispers moved through the compound like a current before the car even stopped at the gate. Then the door opened. Amara stepped onto Lagos ground in a deep burgundy Ankara dress that her mother had sewn for this specific day, the kind of dress that is made with intention, sewn with love, and worn like armor. Her natural hair was arranged in a crown of braids that represented hours of preparation and a lifetime of choosing not to be ashamed of what grew from her head. She moved with the quiet confidence of a woman who had crossed an ocean, survived isolation, excelled in a foreign language, and built a career in a country that had not always made her feel welcome, and had done it all without losing the core of who she was. On her arm was Dr. Ji-ho Kang, dressed with simple and genuine respect, holding her hand with the ease of a man who has been holding that hand long enough that it has become the most natural thing his hand knows how to do. He nodded courteously to everyone they passed. He was not performing. He was simply present, and his presence beside Amara communicated something that required no translation in any language. The compound went quiet. Auntie Chioma stood near the food table with her mouth at a slight angle, in the position of a face that has been caught in the middle of forming an expression it no longer knows whether to finish. She had imagined many versions of this moment. She had not imagined this one. Amara did not look for her. Amara did not scam the compound for people who once delighted in her difficulty. She walked directly, with purpose and without hesitation, to the back of the compound near the kitchen where her mother was sitting on a low bench helping prepare food because no one had thought to give her a chair closer to the celebration. She sat down beside her mother on that bench. She took her mother's hands in both of hers, and in a voice meant only for the two of them, she said, "I am home, Mama." Her mother looked at her, the kind of looking that parents do when they are trying to hold the whole of a child in their eyes, every age they ever were, every difficult morning, every proud moment, all of it at the same time. She did not speak. The tears came quietly, the way her mother had always done everything, without performance, without asking for an audience. Jiho crouched down in the dust in front of Amara's mother without hesitation or self-consciousness, smiled at her with genuine warmth, and attempted the Yoruba greeting Amara had been coaching him on for the entire flight. He got the tone wrong in a way that was so earnest and so endearing that Amara laughed out loud, a real laugh, the full kind, and her mother laughed with her, and Jiho looked between the two of them with affectionate confusion, and then laughed too, kneeling in the dirt of a Lagos compound in his good clothes, completely unbothered. That moment 3 people laughing together near a kitchen bench while the rest of the compound tried to make sense of what they were seeing was worth more than everything Auntie Chioma had ever used to measure a person's value. As the evening moved forward and the food was served and the gathering found its rhythm, something shifted in the compound in the way that things shift when reality arrives and rearranges what people thought they knew. Relatives who had spoken about Amara in dismissive tones for years found themselves watching her move through that space with a kind of ease that was not arrogance, it was simply the ease of a person who knows who they are. And they did not know what to do with what they were feeling. Ji-ho, for his part, conducted himself with a grace that dismantled several assumptions quietly and without drama. He sat with the elders, he asked questions about things he genuinely wanted to understand. When Amara's elderly uncle, who had fought in a way that stiffened her shoulders when she saw him, began to warm up to Ji-ho through a long and winding conversation about traditional medicine, she watched it happen and felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for years. Later, when the children of the compound discovered that Ji-ho knew a Korean card game he was willing to teach, a small crowd formed around him on a mat near the mango tree, and the compound took on a sound she had not expected. It sounded like joy, uncomplicated and real. Auntie Chioma approached Amara near the end of the evening when the food was winding down and the children were getting sleepy. She was different in a way that was hard to name precisely. Smaller was the closest word, but not in a defeated way. Smaller in the way that people become when something has shifted their perspective and they are in the early part of adjusting to it. She stood beside Amara under the mango tree and was quiet for a moment before she spoke. She said, "You did well." The words came out with the slight roughness of something that had to be pushed past resistance to get out at all. Amara looked at her. She had carried so much feeling about this woman for so long, grief and anger and the particular exhaustion of being disbelieved by someone who should have been in your corner. But what she felt now, standing under that tree in the evening air of the city where she was born, was something closer to a kind of tired forgiveness. Not the kind that pretends nothing happened, the kind that simply decides it is done carrying what it was carrying. She said, "Thank you, Auntie." And she meant it as completely as it was possible to mean 2 words. Auntie Chioma looked at her for a long moment. Then she asked, not with the loud confidence she usually carried, but carefully, quietly, like someone who had just realized they might have been learning the wrong lessons for a very long time, how Amara had done it, how she kept moving forward when there was nothing comfortable to stand on, how she had found a person who looked at her the way Ji-ho looked at her, how she had built a life that looked from the outside exactly like what it was, a life chosen with intention by a person who refused to be defined by what she lacked. Amara sat down. She answered every question. She did not rush, and she did not perform generosity. She was simply generous because that was who she had always been underneath everything that had been thrown at her. She talked about early mornings and candle stubs and the scholarship letter and the loneliness of Korea and the library crash and the notes that led to everything else. She talked about the hard seasons in her relationship with Ji-ho and what they had learned from not walking away. She talked about her mother, always her mother, the foundation under every single thing she had ever managed to build. By the time they finished talking, the compound was nearly empty, and the night air was full of the sounds of Lagos settling into itself. Auntie Chioma was quiet in a way that suggested she was doing the serious internal work of a person who has just been handed a mirror they were not expecting. And Amara was ready to go back inside and find her mother and sit with her and simply be a daughter for the rest of the night, which was all she had wanted from the beginning. Amara and Ji-ho married the following year in a ceremony that belonged to both of their worlds equally, Korean traditions and Nigerian traditions present in the same space, neither apologizing for itself, both made more beautiful by the company of the other. There were moments during the celebration when both families, who had come in with their separate guards raised, were laughing at the same thing at the same time, And in those moments, the distance between Seoul and Lagos felt like a number rather than a wall. Amara's mother, her mother, who wore a Korean traditional jacket over her Nigerian wrapper for 3 days and announced she saw no reason to take it off. Ji-ho's mother, the woman who had once said Amara came from nothing, watched her daughter-in-law lead a nursing team on a hospital visit that Ji-ho arranged for her to observe. She watched Amara speak to patients in 3 languages. She watched the way the junior nurses oriented themselves to Amara, the way people orient towards something steady and warm. She watched her son look at his wife with the particular expression of a man who has found where he is supposed to be. She never made another comment about where Amara came from. Some lessons arrive late. They still count. Every year, Amara identifies 3 young girls from low-income families in Lagos and provides direct support for their academic journeys, exam fees, textbooks, phone calls, and the kind of consistent presence that tells a young person, someone who was where you are went somewhere worth going, and they have not forgotten the road. She does this not for recognition. She does it because a teacher once placed an application form on her desk without a word, and that small, quiet act of belief altered the entire direction of her life. And she understands now that belief, passed forward, is one of the few things that multiplies instead of diminishing when you give it away. The girl who carried bread on her head before school grew up to carry lives in her hands. She did not forget where her hands had been. She simply decided what she wanted them to hold next. And the people who invited her back to confirm her failure ended up watching instead the quiet and complete arrival of a woman who had always known who she was and had simply been waiting for the world to catch up. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who is carrying more than people know, someone who has been told they will end up nowhere, someone who is quietly working in the dark towards a morning that has not arrived yet. Leave a comment below and tell us, what is the one thing that kept you going when someone counted you out? If you are new here, welcome. This channel is for people who believe that where you start is not where you have to finish. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because every week we bring you stories of real courage, real love, and real lives that refuse to be ordinary. You were not built for smallness. Keep going.